springtime here in Oregon. It's fence repair season. And what we have here is a wind damaged fence. We also had some dry rot issues. But the way it was positioned in this yard, it was catching a lot of wind, and a couple of the posts snapped off in a recent series of storms, which happened. So here we've got one exposed. We've got a piece of concrete in there that would really be a hassle to dig out. This close to the house, maybe there's pipe, there's wires and stuff in there, so we're going with a little different method on this. We're using these pound-in stakes. Now, one of the things that'll make these better, there's short versions, long versions. I would have almost rather used the short one, is get a grinder, sharpen the bottom of these, and they're going to pound in a lot better, because what these do is they pound and they split in. They pound right into the old rotten post, and they actually use that for stability. The advantage of these in windy areas is that when everything's put together, the fence ends up like a little springy. If the wind hits it and bends over, it springs right back. It's not something like, well, it bends and then snaps and you're done. So I'm working on trying to cut this evenly, which is a hassle. Destroyed one Sawzall blade already, but they're the cheap ones from Harbor Freight, so change out the blade, get this part done. Alright, so with that thing sharpened, it pounds in. It's pounding into the old post, so it splits it as it goes. It's gotten pretty rigid, and since we're both over 35, we take turns pounding this thing, okay? And looks like it's my turn, so I'll finish that down a little more. Big help in sharpening those. They just go in a lot better when you do that. And then the height of it's going to vary a little bit depending on how you want the fence to level out. Like here, we may want to leave enough that, I like to leave them just a little tall so that I can pound it in, because pulling it back out or shimming it is kind of impossible. I mean, it can happen, but it's highly unlikely. But if I need to love tap the top with the sledgehammer a few times to get it go a little further, that's fine. If it sticks out of the ground a little bit, that's fine too. You saw how long those things are. They're nearly 3 feet. Over here, where we've got another fence section going in, we're kind of gauging this based on the old height of the bracket. So you can see this one's got a little room to go in further. A little tricky to deal with that, but not majorly so. And what happened is these are changing height as they go on a gradual hill. So we've got a little bit to work with as far as our distances and measurements on this type of thing. The other thing, I think, when they were doing the original fence, they weren't necessarily keeping the spacing consistent. They were following the contour of the ground, which is, a legitimate way to do it, but this is also going to allow us to use the original fence pieces. I cut off the bottoms that have been down in this bark and we're starting to rot. It's barely noticeable, but I actually went along the bottom of this, cut all those off, because the rest of this is pretty solid and it can go a few years. And the other thing about this type of post is, especially in a high wind area, is that this can see how it springs back? That's what you get out of this type of repair thing. See how it takes all that and it springs back. It can take a fair amount of movement and it just kind of springs back. But it can take a little bit of positioning in there when it's not fully tight. So sometimes we want to think about maybe shimming that or something like that. But in a high wind area, I like the idea of it having a little bit of give and a little bit of springiness. All done. A little labor intensive, not real heavy on materials with this. I actually gonna give the customer a little bit of material money back or credited toward labor, and we're doing okay on something like this. This section of fence was held up with a hinge on one side, but I still did brackets on the other side. The deal is, though, if somebody wants to open it, they can undo it. And I mean, only on one side, and then the other side opens. It's just that they got to be careful. Now, this, notice that's pretty springy, but that's the way it works. Actually, it has some give to it, and it's not going to break. It just springs. You notice it always goes back to center, and that's one of the advantages of this type of post mending. Same as over here. It's a real advantage of that type of post mending. And there was some specifics about no screws or bolts going into the actual building, and that reduces our risk of any dry rot happening on the corner of the building. That's actually just held up on here by tension, and of course the nails here, and of course this is all springy, but if it pops, it just goes right back in its slot because we doubled up the reinforcement here. And little improvements, like cutting off all the bottoms that were dry rotted, except I think this section really didn't have a major problem with that. And then using screws to reattach some of these brackets. It's subtle, but it's reinforced, and it's going to be far more wind resistant.